We've knocked out all of their boats. They have some missiles, but not very many. I think we're in very good shape.
This is a war imposed on us. Transportation of oil has been slowed down because of the attacks and aggression made by Israelis and Americans against us.
Amid the ongoing war with Iran and doubts over it ending soon, the U.S. President Donald Trump has put on a campaign hat as he addressed the crowd in Kentucky. In his campaign against Republican Thomas Massie, Donald Trump touted the success of Operation Epic Fury. The Republican leader claimed that the United States has won in the very first hour. Over the past few days, remember, Trump has claimed again and again that Iran's air capabilities, navy and top leadership are gone. He also went on to say that there is nothing left to target in Iran. However, the president also mentioned that Iran is tough.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right? Over the past 11 days, our military has virtually destroyed Iran. Tough country. Their air force is gone, totally gone. That took the better part of about 3 hours.
On America's end, there is still no clarity on when its operations in West Asia will end. When asked about the back-to-back attacks on the vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump simply said that the crucial waterways will be open in due time. But more recently, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said that U.S.'s ultimate option is to destroy Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors and the Strait of Hormuz. He's also added that the American military is currently not ready to escort tankers through the critical Strait of Hormuz because all of its assets are focused on striking Iran. Now, as per reports, there are indications from the U.S. intelligence that Iran's leadership is still largely intact and is not at risk of a collapse anytime soon. The report cites that even after 2 weeks of relentless American and Israeli bombardment, consistent analysis that the regime is not in danger of collapse and retains control of the Iranian public has been seen. Remember, Iran has laid out its own specifics to end the war. Not only has Tehran shifted its military strategy from retaliatory to sustained strikes, Iran has narrowed its objectives as well to 3 main demands. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says that the war will end only when these 3 conditions will be met. And what are these? First, the recognition of Iran's legitimate rights. Second, payment of reparations. And lastly, international guarantees against future aggression on its soil. Now, while Trump asserts that the war is nearly over and Iran has set its own conditions, American ally Israel says that the war will continue, refusing to set a timeline for the end of fighting with Iran.
As an army, we still have a broad range of targets. We will expand our operations. The goal is to undermine the foundations of this regime, the terror regime, and we continue to harm it. It is already undermined, and we continue to harm it. We have another long plan.
And joining me on the broadcast is Colonel David Rosé. She's a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and former Deputy Director for Peacekeeping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He joins us live from the United States. Colonel, good evening. Welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you what you make of the latest developments. You know, you've got the U.S. president accepting that Iran is tough. It has been a tough country to crack. At the same time, he's saying that there's nothing left to strike in Iran, but we will not leave early from Iran. You know, he's been sending some really contradictory messages.
Yeah. Well, contradictory messages is kind of how he operates. I mean, he's not a traditional politician. He's not a diplomat or traditional statesman. And he talks in a somewhat undisciplined manner. I used to be a speechwriter for not for the president, but for a cabinet member. And it would always drive me crazy when they would stray from the speech because they would say something that was, would come back and be a problem. And then I'd get blamed for it. But with Trump, he speaks from the hip. And part of that is because he wants to confuse people. Part of it is because he holds the traditional media in contempt. And he realizes that if he can say something that is somewhat inconsequential but different, that they'll focus on that instead of focusing on something that might be more consequential. But part of it is he has two different audiences he needs to speak to. So the American people were not really consulted before this war. They will support it if it is short, victorious, and relatively cost-free in terms of life. So for the American people, he has to say, this is going to be short, this is going to be quick, we're going to get everything we want. But for our adversaries in Iran, he needs to say, we're here as long as you want to be here, and we've got plenty more coming, and no cost is too high for us to achieve our goals. So, the sooner you recognize that, the less punishment you're going to take.
So Colonel David, who's going to differentiate that? I mean, in his mind, perhaps he's speaking to two different audiences, and one of them might be just, a very clever strategy to confuse your adversary. But who's going to differentiate that? There are conflicting messages coming out of America, and not just from within America and the Trump cabinet, but also between America and Israel. There seems to be a difference in how they're approaching this conflict.
Yeah, well, ultimately, President Trump decides when we're done. I mean, this is one of the luxuries of expeditionary warfare. When you're operating at a distance, you can leave at a distance, and the consequences are of leaving quickly and perhaps disorganized are not as big as they would be for, say, Israel, for whom this war is an existential war. So that's something that drives people crazy. But if you look at Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, that came as a surprise to everybody. I don't think President Trump is contemplating that, and I know that if he doesn't achieve, he has nailed his colors to the mast. If he does not achieve his military goals here, he is going to pay a very heavy price for it. It will be his legacy will be gone. So this is a big issue for President Trump. I think that there are signs that the Iranian security apparatus is showing stress. And I think that he'll probably hit his military goals within 2 weeks at the outmost. But it's going to be 2 rough weeks.
Colonel David, it's interesting that despite the kind of setbacks that Iran might have faced in terms of its security challenges, their new leader has just put out a first statement since his appointment. And interestingly, he's not calling himself the supreme leader. He's calling himself the revolution's leader, clearly sending out a message that this is still not over. And this is a revolution that we have to take against the United States of America. And many experts around believe that with Iran, they would perhaps like to continue this conflict longer so that the new leader can cement his position as a revolution's leader and make sure that, the crowds, the Iranian citizens are all in this together against the West.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that analysis, but let me give you another possible interpretation, which is that Iran's constitution calls for an Islamic revolution that's perpetuated, and the constitution says this at home and abroad. So I think referring to him as the revolution's leader, I think is a message to Iran's proxy forces. Lebanese Hezbollah is also in an existential fight with Israel at the moment. And I think also, we have the Houthis, and then, of course, the Iranian-directed militias in Iraq, which have been attacking the U.S. embassy. So I take it as more of a call for Iran to activate their Arab armies overseas to take action against us.
And therefore, how do you see this moving forward? Because you've got Iran, which is retaliating strongly. You've got Donald Trump, who's saying we're not going to leave early despite the fact that we've got nothing left to target. Then you've got Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this is not over yet.
Yeah, well, first off, there's plenty left to target. And what we're seeing is that the asymmetry of cost has shifted in favor of the U.S. and Israel, where instead of firing expensive missiles at a distance, we're flying over targets and dropping very inexpensive bombs and firing anti-tank missiles. So, the Iranian missile strategy, on the other hand, to me indicates that they have no ability to launch coordinated volleys of fires. They've dispersed a few missiles, perhaps 100, which are around the country that fire in a disorganized fashion, mostly at civilian infrastructure. That's a sign of weakness, not strength. So I think that we'll continue to see attacks against the military structure and against the elements of internal security forces that conducted the massacre of protesters in January. There was a checkpoint manned by individual Basij militiamen that was attacked in Tehran yesterday. That's a very, very not a good sign for the regime, showing that individual soldiers just checking people in cars to see if they're going to protest the regime, that was targeted. So there's a lot of targets and there's a lot of fighting to happen, but I think the initiative has shifted against Iran.
I mean, Colonel David, if you're defining weakness through the fact that this conflict has also seen civilian targets, what about the U.S. military allegedly killing 165 schoolgirls in an elementary school in Minab? There are reports all about it.
Yeah, that is an element of weakness that the U.S. has in acquiring good information on targets in the ground. I'm still unable to draw a conclusion just because there's no objective reporting in Iran. So, as you know, the Iranian regime has a policy of taking reporters hostage, but we were bombing in the area, and I think that it is quite possible the school there was adjacent to like 600 yards from a Revolutionary Guard Navy command post and was originally part of that naval base and then had been converted from military access to a school in 2016. So I think it's quite possible that there was an identification made in 2011 that was carried forward through error. But I don't know any serious person who suggests it was a deliberate targeting. Even if you think the worst of the U.S., think that we deliberately targeted a school at the outset of the conflict, you'd have to ask yourself, first off, why we haven't been doing it repeatedly. And secondly, why would you target a school in a remote province rather than in Tehran? So there's an ongoing investigation, but I think given the amount of what's going on, I think Iran has said they've mistakenly fired 2 missiles at Turkey. These sort of things happen, and they're always a tragedy.
Okay. Collateral damage is, one of the first casualties of war, and unfortunately, we have seen that coming from both sides. But I'll leave it there. Colonel David, thanks very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.